Hey there. This is one of those little blog posts to myself, but I think that it's also relevant to really anyone who has conversations with other human beings. So, we are social creatures, and I think that it's really important for us to talk to each other and have important and meaningful conversations about all of the things that are on our minds. And it's safe to say that in this moment in time, there's a lot of important things on people's minds. That said, I think that it can be a little dangerous or precarious if we're not careful with how we go about having those conversations. I think that there's a few things that we could do as both listeners and as speakers so that we're able to have those deep and important conversations while also protecting the other person in the conversation. As a listener, I think is really important to protect ourselves. I think that we all know the feeling of being totally ambushed by somebody where you ask them how they're doing and they just let her rip. They just unleash the fire hose on you and dig into all of their emotional baggage and a bunch of heavy topics that you weren't prepared to field. And all of a sudden, here you are. And so, in this moment, though, it can feel really rude to shut that down, right? After all, they're clearly needing to talk about this and unload, but at the same time, you didn't ask for a fire hose to be pointed at your face, and so it is perfectly acceptable to gracefully step out of the stream. And I think that it's uncomfortable and it's a weird skill to have to develop, but it is important to say that if you're not in a position to talk about something, you need to say so because ultimately you need to protect your energy. You need to protect your mental health. If you're elsewhere in your brain and somebody's coming at you with a bunch of other things that are on their minds and you're not in a place to receive it, it could go pretty badly for you. So I do think that it's important to really recognize that and protect yourself. And you could help people do that without sounding like a jerk. You can do things that are both subtle, but also more explicit to help them better understand where you're at and that you don't want to talk about something. Sometimes you can lightly or subtly redirect the conversation. Your body language will likely be communicating that you're not in a position to receive this, but whether or not they're actually listening to that is a wholly different matter. But what you could do is basically redirect the conversation subtly, gently, kind of try to switch gears a little bit or signal that you would like to switch gears. But sometimes even that doesn't work. And sometimes you have to be more explicit. This is a really hard skill to develop, but what I've found is kind of acknowledging the other person and understanding and validating that what they're saying is important and clearly important to them is important. So being like, wow, like, whoa, that's a lot, or "Phew, wow, that sounds like that's pretty heavy. Whatever it might be, just that recognition, I think, goes a long way. And one of the things that I found to be helpful is to sort of say, like, I'd love to hear more about this sometime, but and you could say like, and then that's the but, right? So it's like you're basically saying, I care about you, or I hear what you're saying. I care about you and I want to hear about this, but also I'm not in a position to receive this right. And a lot of times it just kind of comes out like, oh wow, like that's a lot. Like I'd love to talk about this sometime. Unfortunately, like right now I'm dealing with X, Y, or Z or whatever, or my mind is somewhere else and I'm not in a position to get into that right now. But that doesn't mean I don't care. Would you be open to talking about it another time? And then usually that elicits a response like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And you could smooth that over by saying, like, yeah, it's all good. You know, I care about you, but also like I appreciate you because I'm going through it right now or whatever in this moment in time. So it's just that kind of, I think, the acknowledgement, the expression of I actually care about you and what you're saying, but also acknowledging your own state and not letting their mind just find its way in, and it becomes your problem all of a sudden that you didn't ask for. So it's an art form, it's a skill to develop. So that's kind of like, as a listener, you could kind of help people understand where you're at and basically say, like, I can't get into this right now. Sorry. But then as a speaker, or kind of on the flip side of that, right? And I am a very exuberant person. I have a million thoughts and ideas and all sorts of things, and I'm willing to share them with anyone who will listen. And my lovely wife is an introvert and definitely has a different communication and energy than me. And so she is often on the receiving end of all of this. So I have a lot of practice being that fire hose, and it's difficult, right? And like any couple, like that's the work, right? Is like figuring out how to have good conversations, but also really kind of do so in a way that's healthy and isn't just blindsiding or ambushing them. We have this natural tendency to want to unload what's on our minds, especially whenever things are important, right? And I think that there's kind of a proportional relationship, right? Where like the more important or heavy or personal or whatever the topic, I feel like the urgency or the need to get it out also increases, or should. I think that that's like actually a very healthy dynamic there. But at the same time, it's really important for us to take a beat before unleashing on the other person. And this really involves checking in with the other person and considering their mind before we let her rip, right? So it's like, where are they at? Like, what's their body language saying? Like, what's their environment? What's their context? Did they just come off of a wholly different meeting or something like that? What might they be dealing with right now? Are they in a position to be able to receive what you're wanting to give, right? There's a few different tactics I think that can be helpful for this. And the one is quite simply just asking, how are you? So rather than just kind of jumping right into it, that question of like, how are you is like often tells you everything you need to know about whether or not they're in a position to receive your shit. So that's important. It's like, how are you, but not in a superficial way, in a really active listening way where you're literally listening to the answer to how are you. And that's, again, another challenging skill that's worth developing. And sometimes it's you that's on the receiving end of the question of how are you? And that question isn't a permission slip to let her rip, but rather it is an opportunity for you to kind of signal. This is where it gets a little tricky with language because it does kind of feel unnatural, but I do think it's important to put the ball in their court, because you could say things like, I'm doing all right. I'm wrestling with some stuff. I'd love to talk about that with you. I'd really be interested in what you have to say about this. Is now a good time, or do you want to get together another time or something like that, right? And that kind of gives them agency, right? That gives them permission to basically say what's on your mind. Or they could say like, oh yeah, I'd love to hear about that. I'm late for a doctor's appointment, or, whatever that might be, right? They're not in a position to receive it. And I think that's kind of a healthy thing, right? What we're trying to do is have these important conversations, be able to have healthy conversations about consequential and important matters, but to do so in a respectful way, in a caring way, in a loving way, and in a way that allows for people to have good conversations with good outcomes. Because by not doing this stuff, right, wherever the feeling, you walk away from a conversation, it's like the energy vampire thing, or you just got shell shocked because of that fire hose. We don't necessarily come away from that feeling like that was a healthy interaction, even if the substance of what was being discussed was really important for them to share that, or for you to share that. So that's the art, I think, of this. And that's why I think it's worth talking about. I for sure really need to get better at heeding this advice, but I also think that it's an important skill for anyone to develop. And just so it said, yeah, again, there's a lot going on and a lot on people's minds, and we need to be able to have healthy conversations about important things. And I just think that it's important to just flag that we need to be able to do that in a way that protects ourselves and the other person and is born from respect. Anyways, happy Friday.